Okay, so what are we missing still? I'm sure I heard someone say Psycho with the Bates Motel up there. Hope you recognise that one. Did anyone pick up on the bottom right? I didn't hear that one shouted out. No. Think Jamie Lee Curtis, a lighthouse and a group of undead pirates. It's The Fog. Classic Stephen King story. Wicker Man, yes, I heard someone shout that out. Shining, Nosferatu, Carrie. Did anyone shout out the bottom left? That's close to home for me in the UK. That's the American Werewolf in London. And the remaining one on there, if you know your Hong Kong films, that's it's a film called Rouge. It's more of a ghost story than a horror story. It's not particularly horrific, but that's a good practice for you all. So at various points in this talk, I'll be showing stills from movies, and I hope someone will shout out which movie it is. Makes it a lot more fun when you all partake in this. So without any further ado, you've had your practice. We'll move on to the first movie. Oh, that's an easy one. Friday the 13th, yes. But what's this all got to do with code? Because I will bring it back to code. We've got Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th is one of those magic things in PHP that's fun to work with. Do we have Andreas here? I'm sure I saw him earlier. Dates and times. We have a nice little code snippet here, something I found on Stack Overflow rather than something I actually saw in production use for myself. We have someone that is storing their dates in a varchar data type on a database. And not only that, they're using DMY format to store it, and expecting the database somehow magically to recognize that that string of numbers and slashes is a date and to work accordingly with it. So, trying to get a date between date from and date to, okay, we'll ignore the other issues with SQL injection risks and so on. That's bad enough in itself, but at least we're working with known values which we control here. We're controlling the date times. They're not user input, so it's not quite as bad. But storing that date in a varchar DMY format, oh. So, select splat from appointments. I tried doing something similar myself to see just how well it would work. And that's all the PHP Northwest meetups, monthly meetups for the year ahead, or it was when I wrote this back in January. So, if we do a similar query, and I want to get all the meetups between, oh, what did I say? The 2nd of January and the 5th of January. I know the first meetup of the month is between those dates. The problem, if I'm using that varchar and DMY format, is it gives me a heck of a lot of meetups all in that. I'm expecting one. So, coding horror number 1. People who use varchar for storing dates on their databases. Please, 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 if and when you see that, fix it. If I see it, I just go into the crawl up and die inside. Now, it's a fairly common mistake for less experienced developers to make. You're all experienced developers, so you're more likely to be reviewing that code. Be gentle on them when you tell them what they're doing wrong. Explain how to do it correctly. Explain about date and date time, data types on the database, and hopefully next time they have to work with dates, they'll do it the correct way. You're going to be the mentors of the next generation of developers, so it's your role to explain the problems with doing something like that and the solutions to help younger, less experienced developers learn. Ooh, not just the ring, Thank you, yes. This is the original Japanese version of The Ring, which is one of my all-time favourite films. Absolutely brilliant. If you haven't seen it, do so. Don't watch the trashy American remake. The Ring, an all-time classic. And what has that to do with code? Well, rings are loops. We use loops all the time in PHP and when we're coding. What are some problems with loops besides, well, there's a whole host, but here's a prime example that I see very regularly. Again, a database related one. We're querying a list of students. I did find this in genuine code from one of my teams a couple of years back. We're getting a list of students and we want to get the list of all the classes for every student. So get the list of students and then go into a loop, a horrible ring, retrieving classes for each one in turn. Now, if you've got a database with a class of 30 students, that might not be too much of a problem. 30 students, 31 queries. That's going to run pretty quickly, not specially, but you're not going to notice problems. But the systems I was working with at the time, we weren't just looking at one class or even one school. We were looking for the set of academies for the entirety of the Premier League. How many football clubs? 36 football clubs, each with its academy of 80 to 100 students on average. All of a sudden, you're doing that query for 1,000, 2,000, 2.5. It begins to slow down when you run it with real data. It becomes it's a very common mistake, particularly if your developers aren't that familiar with databases and relationships between tables. And this is a great area to help them understand better. Explain to them about things like joins. And there's some great blog posts. I think it's Jeff Atwood's Coding Horror website actually has a wonderful explanation of the different join types that SQL supports. I think he uses pirates and ninjas as his examples in code, but it shows all the different joins, how to do them, what they return in a very easily visible way. So it's a great idea to point your developers to that and help them to understand how to write efficient database queries. Now, when I first did this talk, someone pointed out, well, you're doing a group concat here. If you have a lot of courses or classes that your students are attending, you might end up with something that's too long for group concat. Okay, unlikely. Most students don't do 4,000 classes at the same time, but we might have history in there for classes they have done in the past or are scheduled to do in the future. So we can simplify that, get rid of the group concat, the join will still work, and we can prettify everything in the PHP front-end side of things. Oh, yeah, I love this. It's not a good film, it's just a fun film. The Mummy. Now, here's where I have my first linguistic problem, perhaps. Mummies are wrapped in bandages, and in English we might say bindings. I don't know if the same applies elsewhere, but I hope you appreciate that there is an English language connection between bandages and bindings and the type of bindings you might get when you're working with a database. Now, this code does not work. The person that had written this code had spent the best part of a day trying to get it to work before I went over to find out why it was all taking so long. They'd been advised that the best thing they could do was use database bindings because that protected against SQL injection. but no one had bothered to explain to them exactly what database bindings were. So they were trying to use database binding for everything, for the table name, for the offset values, for the order by column. They would probably, if they'd thought about it, have tried using it for a list of column names without understanding how bindings actually work. Now, I'm sure everyone here knows, but it's always good to explain to developers when you are explaining about database binding. Bindings work for literals, not for things like the database table name itself, not for column names. It's for things that you would otherwise wrap in those nice single quotes or numeric literals or anything like that. So that could never possibly work, and of course it wasn't working, and they'd spent a day trying to figure out why none of their bindings were working. There are a number of ways of dealing with this. If we want to dynamically introduce a table name, an order by, we can whitelist table names and check them, but we might use a sprintf or something like that to build the query. The one oddity there is offset will actually work even though it's not supposed to. Okay, but once someone gets their head around what database binding and bind variables actually are, it's still very much the recommended approach to take to the database queries, and hopefully they won't use it for things they shouldn't use it for in the future, and their queries will work without problems. Ooh, not quite Dawn of the Dead. Think slightly earlier. Night of the Living Dead. Yeah. Sam Raimi's original Night of the Living Dead. So what's dead got to do with coding? Well, dead code, of course. You often come across code that's commented out in methods, in functions, whatever, maybe even whole methods that are commented out. Now, it's fairly obvious what that code does. There's only 4 lines commented out. But if it's 20 lines, and if it's 20 random lines with some lines that aren't commented out, you're making the code very hard to read. When code is dead, it just gives you not problems, but it takes a little bit longer for you to read and identify what that function is actually doing, because your mind is having to remove the commented code. So when you have dead code like this, don't just comment out the lines, delete them. That's what your version control system is there for. You've still got history of what was in the function before you made the changes. And stripping that code down to just the couple of lines that's necessary just makes life for the next person to look at that code a whole lot easier. 4 lines, less of a problem, but you still have to think, I saw you looking at it, trying to work it out in your mind. That's taking you a couple of seconds. If you've got that time and time again in lots of methods within your code base, that all adds up, and it gets you annoyed as well by the end of the day. So rather than comment out, delete, commit, that's all you actually need in there, and you can do a commit that actually explains why it's been removed. Far easier to work with. But dead code can be more subtle than that. That's a weird one. There's actually 2 problems here. Sum equals 0 is a pretty meaningless line. It doesn't achieve anything. Hopefully your IDE should tell you what's that doing there, assuming you use an IDE, that is. And if you don't, you probably should. I don't, but I have my own reasons. It's got me a PHP hooligan scarf for being hardcore like that. But a good IDE will tell you that some is never used. You can get rid of it. PHP's optimizer will actually remove it at the bytecode level. So it'll never exist in the optimized code. So you won't actually see any performance difference removing it, but readability-wise, it will help you. The other subtle problem here is options. There's a variable being passed in that isn't used. Why? That's just overhead, and it's mandatory. Even worse. So you should probably, at the very least, set a default for options so that it's no longer mandatory, or go through the code base, check every call to add values, and remove the unused variable. It's being passed through for no reason whatsoever. I see Damien over there. Exacat would pick up on that and tell you it's very, very bad and stupid and silly. But it's an easy mistake when you're working through a code base to think, I'm supposed to be refactoring that. I don't know why it's there. The original developer probably had a reason for it, so I better not touch it. No, don't think that. If it's not needed, don't use it. Code read this. Ooh, he discovered this wonderful new operator that could do powers, the star power operator, in one go. And he modified the code to use it. Well, yeah, it's great using the nice new shiny operators, but remove the old code as well. Why have we got 2 returns there when we don't need it? So always try to clean code up as much as you can when you're refactoring code, working through changing code in some way or other. Just have what's absolutely necessary to execute the function. Spurious code like that just makes it harder for the next person looking at that code to read and understand. They have to waste time thinking why before they come to the inclusion because someone couldn't be bothered. Anyone recognize this one? Oh, good. Everyone recognized or a lot of you recognized the original ring. None of you recognized the American remake of it. That makes me so happy. American remakes of classic films, there is only one thing I can say about that. And to be honest, I don't think I need to explain any further the significance of don't repeat yourself. It can cause lots of problems throughout systems if you have too many copies of the same function in different namespaces that are called from different places. Worst case I ever found was 21 copies of the same function in different files. And the code never knew which one it was supposed to be working with. I actually had to fix it, and I confess I made a mistake. I didn't find every single reference when I scrapped and reduced it to a single function. So I did manage to break the code, but once I'd resolved that, I'd got 21 copies of a function that was reduced to 1 copy. They're all identical. It was crazy. There may be a time and a place when you're working with domain-specific models where it's justifiable to duplicate code, but for the main, unless you know what you're doing with domains, try and avoid it. Ooh, anyone recognize this one? Good, that's another positive. This is one of the worst horror films I have ever seen. It's called Chain Letter. And the plot is basically a glorified slasher horror film. Guy goes around killing people with chains in various imaginative fashions. and then it turns out it's some kind of setup from the father-in-law of the intended next victim, and it becomes very, very weird. And they actually made sequels to it as well, but I couldn't bring myself to watch any of the sequels. But chains. Okay, common mistake here. We have a user system and a list of followers stored in a varchar as a comma-separated list of IDs. This is something I see so often on Stack Overflow, and it really is a nightmare situation. It might work quite well for your initial queries. You just want to be able to pluck out, say, Deborah, and then get a list of who Deborah's followers are. And there's only one in this case. So you can write a simple little bit of code that just explodes on the comma to create an array, loops through getting the list of friends, or even use it as part of a where-in clause. What becomes harder, and all of a sudden you get the questions appearing on Stack Overflow, how do I find all the people that are followed by the user ID 1 follows? So, selects platform users where, yeah, okay, I'll try and execute that query. Oh, it looks quite right. Oh, hang on, why is Shirley in that list? So you get the question on Stack Overflow straight away. And you have to explain to people that the number 10 contains a digit 1. Okay, that's going to work, isn't it? What? Okay, it's the commas, isn't it? The leading and trailing commas. There may not be a comma before or after. Okay, we've finally got a query that actually works. Hang on. Yeah, it has worked correctly, but, or how many different conditions does it take? This is so common when developers start out. I see it time and again. Fortunately, I've never encountered it with any of my team members ever. And that's just as well, because I think I would start losing my mind and beating them around the head with a wet kipper. But on Stack Overflow, that question will come up 10, 15, 20 times a day from developers. Okay, but at least we can provide a query that works, or we can even simplify it, because it's so common that the MySQL core development team came up with a solution for it. Yay, it works, find in set. It's not optimized, it can't use indexes, so if you're working with large data volumes, it can be very slow, but at least it simplifies things. And then you get the next set of questions. But I don't want to follow so-and-so anymore. How do I modify that list of comma-separated values? And it's just a nightmare to work with at all levels. So the solution there, normalize your data properly, use join queries, and life is so much easier. So getting developers to understand how joins work and table relations work is not strictly PHP, because it applies whatever language you're using, but it's an absolute essential if you want to be a good developer at any time in your career, to understand how to structure your data to be queried efficiently and how to write efficient queries. And ORMs, Doctrine or Eloquent, if you're a Laravel user like myself, do simplify how to write the queries to work with that kind of thing. But it's good to know how to write them from a SQL command line as well, and to understand those data relations. Okay, next film. Mummy Returns, yes. I did say don't repeat yourself earlier. There are exceptions. Making a sequel as opposed to a reboot can work. Sequels aren't always better than the originals, but Mummy 2, I can waste a couple of hours watching it, have an enjoyable time of it. And it does get us back to bindings again. Yes, that is a fun one. Okay, so we have to go through the explanation of what binding a variable actually does. It's absolutely essential knowledge for all developers. The little bit with the quotes in there. If it's a string, binding effectively quotes it for you is the first thing to remember. But it's not simply a SQL inject this string into the SQL statement. It's handled nice and cleanly at the database side as long as the code is nicely written. So foo itself isn't going to be injected in there cleanly. I don't even know what that would do, to be honest, at the low level of the databases. I'm sure Gabby DeVere would be able to tell us, but she's talking in another room. Okay, let's fix that. Handle the percentage wrapping before you do the binding. Do the binding without quotes, because that's what binding does for you, or one of the things it does for you. And we've got something that works. And another one, that's an interesting one. We're binding the same value to two different places here. Now, depending on which PHP version you're using, I did have a note, I thought, as to which one allowed it, but there was one very early version of PHP 5.3.7 where that would actually work. But now you're binding names, your placeholder names have to be unique. So for something like that, you would have to work with uniquely named Q1, Q2 in this case, and bind each one separately, unless you are working with 5.3.7 or whatever it was, where it happened to work for a single version of PHP. Halloween. Another great film, October the 31st. How many days are there in a month? You can see what's coming next, can't you? There was a company I used to work for a while back which gave every applicant to work there a code test. One of those where they do it in their own time, just send it through in an email. And he was just working out a date set when a particular date would fall, the 15th I think it was, on each month, what day it was, to know when the public relations team should get their monthly bonus payment. So someone here is working out the dates for each month. It's actually quite nice at first look. They're using date time objects. They're using a date interval to work out that they want to do the year ahead, date periods to handle it. They're even using a generator, memory efficient. That is quite nifty code. That's someone that's showing off that they know a lot of things about date times in PHP and how to write generators and other wonderful things. Where does this become a problem? They're assuming that adding 1 month, P1M, to any date will give you next month. So that's what they expect, and they probably originally wrote this early in January when it did work. I get this code through on the 31st of January. Not Halloween, but the 31st of January, but the principle's the same. Doesn't look quite right. It's a very simple one to fix, but people assume if something works on a particular date, it'll work every date of the year. Adding 1 month to the 20 when you're on the 28th will always work, because every month has 28 days. On the 29th, it won't necessarily work unless it's a leap year. On the 30th, it gets a bit more silly if you're in, etc., etc. You can all see that. So the simple solution, initialize your date time object to the first day of the month that you're working with. If you're just adding 1 month to work with things, it's so easy to do. And again, going to Stack Overflow, every couple of months you get those questions. Every month that has 30 days rather than 31 or 28 or 29 if it's a February. So every other month you get half a dozen queries cropping up where people are adding a month and it's jumping a month, skipping a month. You'd have thought they'd have learned by now. Well, it's not actually always the same person, I will give them that. But it's an easy mistake, again, for a novice coder to make, someone a bit junior that's never experienced it before. Once you have experienced it, you should always remember it and also know how to fix it. But if you're reviewing code and you see something like that, always double check. But it's a good idea to double check it in your mind first, rather than modify the date time on the virtual host you're running it on, because that modified the date time on my Windows box and I had a lot of scheduled tasks which all of a sudden triggered off, and it took me ages to clean up, which is why I hate anyone who does that with a passion, because they cost me half a day cleaning up my box that I'd messed up as a result of it. Alien, yes, space horror. Space horror. Okay, most young developers, when you're working with them, you hope you're mentoring them, showing them how to avoid the problems you made so that they don't stumble into the same situations that you're constantly getting into. It might take me 50 attempts to get something working. If I'm mentoring someone, I hope that they'll only make the mistake 20 times, because then I know I'll have done better. But in this case, I honestly don't have any hope for the developer that did that. It actually works, which is the worst thing about it. They're satisfied that they've solved a problem. They have come up with some code that it will pass every test that they throw at it for what it's trying to achieve. They've solved a problem that shouldn't ever exist. Okay, the manual explains exactly what they were doing wrong. So if they'd bothered to read the PHP docs, it tells them what the issue is. And I've not got the actual code example from the manual, from the PHP docs, but it explains with examples how to do it correctly. It should be as straightforward as that. It means two things about that developer that I have never met, because it was legacy code I inherited several years after they'd written it. It means they can't read the documentation for the language, and it means that they have no understanding of PHP's type comparisons or cross-type comparisons. And that's the one instance I have found in all these examples where I don't see any hope for that developer. Everyone else, you can guide them, but for someone that isn't prepared to even read the basic documentation and has no understanding of data types or type comparisons and clearly can't find the information out, I think they're past hope. And I am sorry to say that, but that is my space nightmare, that I actually meet the guy, the person that wrote that code someday. 7, yes. I love this film. 7. But what the heck's 7 got to do with code? 7 is the highest number, or the highest digit, when you're working in octal. Oops. So you look at something like that. Oh, it's a beauty. I love this one. It's so easy to fall into this mistake. I've done it in the past. You write your code like that. It's beautifully formatted, 2 digits, and so everything lines up perfectly. And then we try to dump out the keys and values in a loop. And something goes wrong somewhere down the line. Now, last time I came across this, they were creating a date time picker month drop down. The problem with that is that the drop down contains the string as the displayed thing. And users were just looking through, they were finding the month they were wanted, they were selecting it, until someone noticed there was a missing month a week later. So we'd had code running for a week with that. Not so much a problem, except there'd been a lot of people entering September as their date. So the back end is working with the 0 and is storing that 0 as part of the date, using it in PHP date functions. So all of a sudden we have a lot of corrupted dates on the database that have been stored there as a result of it all. When you're working with numeric values as keys, don't put a leading 0 on them unless you really want octal. It might line up beautifully, but that is still nice looking code. It's perfectly easy to read. I don't need everything lined up. Absolutely. Okay, Pan's Labyrinth is the English language title. I was a bit concerned, would the films have the same translatable name in other European languages? Pan's Labyrinth. And I have a lovely example of labyrinthine code to go with it. A constructor. This, thank goodness, is none of my code. It's not code I work with on a daily basis. I have never had to review this code. I wasn't able to squeeze the genuine example I had from code I have worked with on a screen in any way that was readable, because that was passing 30 arguments into the constructor. Here is code from a very common framework, library, call it what you will, which is still using 11 arguments to the constructor. Now, I can't actually fault I should have anonymized it really, shouldn't I? I shouldn't be saying who it is. I'm not trying to shame the developers here, because the way they're working with it, there aren't really any alternatives for them. But generally, well, not without a pretty major rewrite of how everything works, maybe to work with containers or something. But generally speaking, you should try and pass as few arguments to a constructor as you can. Whoops. Okay, a quote from Uncle Bob Martin there from Clean Code. Ideal number of arguments for a function is 0. That applies to constructors as well. 1, possibly 2, okay, try and avoid them where you need to. And I do like that last line. More than 3 requires special justification, so 11, or the 30 that I found that I couldn't fit on screen. And if you can't justify, even if you can justify it, don't do it. Okay. Scream. Yeah. Scream. Scream. Error suppression. Especially unnecessary error suppression using the @ operator. Now, it's best to avoid it if at all possible. It's a big overhead. If you have an error, it has to go through all the error handling and then decides to do nothing with it. But if you're assuming you've got a value back and you haven't, you could be introducing bugs into the code quite easily. There are a couple of cases where it may be justifiable to do it. Something that, when you don't get a response from an external API or something, gives you a warning on screen. It echoes the warning. So there are occasionally cases to justify it. DNS get record is quite a good one. If you don't pass an argument in, or you're passing a null in, so when we suppress and when we don't suppress, if we suppress it, we don't get that displayed. If you don't suppress it, you get a display on screen. You don't want that in the midst of all your user screens. So suppression there, you could half justify. Even then, there's better ways to do it. Create an error handler that treats it as an exception, so you can then use try-catch to handle it. It won't display the warning if you do it like that. So if we wrap it round, we'll still suppress the first time, and our exception actually tells us we shouldn't be doing that. Let it work cleanly. Convert to an exception, try-catch blocks, far better than that error suppression. That's basically the man pages for it. And why Scream? Actually, the connection with Scream is a certain extension that's actually quite useful for identifying where you are suppressing errors in your code. If you're using the Scream extension, it suppresses the @ operator. So when you execute your code, then the error isn't suppressed. It is highlighted, and you can then identify everywhere it's used in your code base, and you can sort those circumstances out. And it's as simple as installing the extension and then an ini set that you can use. Someone said this one earlier. This is Dawn of the Dead. More dead code. And for those of you who know me and know that I am responsible for PHP Excel with all its failings, I'm subject to coding horrors myself. We're back to zombies and dead code. Why is this dead? It's dead because I did some refactoring of the code once upon a time. We originally had a block of code that would take a date-time value as either an integer timestamp or as a string or as a date-time object or almost anything that you threw at it, and would then convert it to a date-time object and use that to create an Excel serialized timestamp. And I did some major refactoring of it, so it would work only with date-time immutables, and it required a date-time zone argument as an optional argument. But and I forgot to change the doc blocks. The doc blocks are now dead code. They don't match the actual signature of the function. So, all those mistakes, they're all fairly straightforward and simple ones to fix. Good code review should pick up on any of those. But whatever you do, when you find coding horrors like this, don't let them build up and overwhelm you in the way that Slimer overwhelms the Ghostbusters, but exercise them as soon as you find them. Thank you very much.